Welcome. Good evening. Last week we discussed Black History Month. What it was, what it is, who celebrates it, who doesn't. We cannot talk about any history, especially Black history, without first letting you know who contributed, who the icons were. So tonight, we're going to touch on just a few of the many icons and contributors to Black history. Those who made history, many more than just Martin and Malcolm. So when I think of Black history, my mind automatically goes to Martin, Malcolm, Rosa Parks, because those are the people that I learned about in school. Actually, some of these names we're going to discuss, I've never heard in my life, and I'm someone who is considered to be educated. So I also feel like what I call intentional history. So America doesn't want us to know the history that we had. They want us to know the history that they want to present that we had. So Clarence, when it comes to presenting accurate information, what do you think the reason behind it? Do you agree when I say that intentional history?
I 100% totally agree. And I'm going to say why I agree now. It's even present today, because I think you and I talked about it the other day, the critical race theory, where they're trying to not teach parts of history because they say, especially the civil rights era, that it could adversely affect the people that see. The kids are not going to be able to handle the brutality, and they don't want it to be taught. So yes, I think throughout the history that it has been intentionally left out, and there has only been a certain part of history that has been taught.
Do you believe, Mildred, do you think it's a cultural aspect? So do you think that everyone has the same experience to where they're not learning about Black history in their schools?
That's everywhere. When you say intentional, it's for a reason. They take certain things out so we don't educate ourselves, so we don't feel empowered. And I know Clarence said the critical race theory trying to take out certain parts of history, but we need to be intentional ourselves, not just any history. Our Black history is what's being taken out, not white history, so we have to make sure that we're clear when we say that, the intention is on us, not everybody. Does that make sense?
Right. Absolutely. So before a bullet ripped through this man's body, he was just an ordinary man. He chopped wood for a living. He earned $6 per day. He was a deacon. He worked at the hospital, inspired an absolute movement. His death led to equal voting rights. Yet his name is often forgotten. Jimmy Lee Jackson. Does that name sound familiar to you?
Yeah.
What do you know about Jimmy Lee Jackson? And when did you learn about Jimmy Lee Jackson?
I learned about Jimmy Lee Jackson. I want to say when I was, I think like 20.
So after school, quite a bit
it was
after school.
Because a lot of things that I end up learning about Black history, history. I'm not going to call it Black history, history. I learned when I became a youth counselor. So there's certain things we had to study to give our kids because it wasn't given into school.
Right.
Jill, and I only say this for accuracy, and I really don't, because I understand that this is about history, and I only say this for accuracy. Jimmy Lee Johnson, and you got to know the story about Jimmy Lee Johnson. Jimmy Lee Johnson is the reason for the whole, what you want to call, civil rights movement that we know of today. What happened to Jimmy Lee Johnson? Jimmy Lee Johnson is actually from Marion, Alabama. Jimmy Lee Jackson was from Marion, Alabama. And he was actually one of the people that were putting things together before King blew up. He was putting the church members together. He was doing like all of that. And his death actually is what catapulted the march on Selma, a march from Selma to Montgomery. It goes into Blood Sunday. All of that is a domino effect of the death of Jimmy Lee Jackson.
How do I want to Why do you think that became a movement?
because
In particular, why?
because he wasn't the face that they was looking for.
Okay, I'm
And when I
looking
said-
for another
Hold
answer.
on, let me finish. Being that he wasn't the face or wasn't deemed as educated.
Okay.
So being that he wasn't deemed as educated, they wanted a face. Martin Luther King was a face, was an educated person. So Martin Luther King background was better than his. As far as
Okay.
educational wise.
But he was already dead. So
Well,
this
well,
the movement happened after
you missing
the
what I'm
death,
saying.
right?
Well, Eric is on point and he's going in the right direction. And to answer your question, Eric is actually on point. He's going in the right direction. Your question was, why was his name kept out? Give me your question again.
Why do you think that this led to the Selma Montgomery March and the voting rights in that particular time?
Well, actually, and that's why I wanted to correct Jill. And I understand you're saying voting rights. This was the whole civil rights issue.
it's
This was the whole civil rights. That's why, and I wasn't trying to, I just wanted to correct you for purposes of education. We don't want to give out misinformation. But you were right.
But that is accurate.
Yeah,
though.
yeah. You're right. And what I'm saying is, I want to give the
Yeah.
entirety of it.
The whole story.
You got to get the whole story. So I'm not saying anybody's wrong. I'm just framing a picture. Let me put it like that. All right. Eric is right. What happened was Jimmy Lee Johnson. He was high school educated.
Yeah.
He was a very articulate man by what they say. He was aggressive. The problem was he was more aggressive
I was
than Martin Luther
and I was
King.
getting to that point.
Yes, no, he
That's
was.
what- yeah,
yeah,
that's
and
where
that's
he
why I
was
said he
going.
was
Yeah, I
going.
was
But
going
he
right
was
there.
he was aggressive, and where the face was wanted to be a peaceful thing. Like Jimmy Lee was, he wasn't militant, but he was aggressive. He was forceful, saying that we want these rights, we want to do this, we want to do that, and he caused uproars. He didn't just quietly go say, "Please give it to us." Jimmy was like, "Yo, let's go get it."
Yeah.
So let me ask, because I'm a second grader. So you're saying that the Selma Montgomery March occurred while he was still alive?
No,
it didn't.
occur when he was
I
still
just wanted
alive.
to make it clear
He
because
was the backbone behind it.
There you
okay.
go.
Now, and people don't realize he was actually shot by a state trooper who
Yes.
was never charged. Why? The scenario, according to history, is he was protecting his grandfather and his mother
From being beaten.
from being beaten by this state trooper, and the state trooper felt like he was like his life was in danger.
I'm not even gonna go
I'm
there.
just
That's
saying
today.
you gotta,
You gonna say that's today?
That's right
you
now.
know what I'm saying? That's where I was getting at when I say what led to the uproar. Just like today, in today's society, when we have a cop killing one of our own, what happens?
Right.
We march downtown. People riot all over different major cities. That's what I was getting at. This particular death became an uproar, and so many were angry at that time. So that kind of pushed the movement.
So before we go on and discuss more of these figures, I do have a question to pose for the panel. The question is, why do you feel like it is important for one to learn about their own culture's history? The next question, which I'm going to answer, is do you feel it's important for another culture to learn? In other words, do you think it is important for me to know about your history? So, E, do you want to go
First
ahead
and
and take the
foremost,
first?
I'm gonna be quite honest. We need to learn about our history, hands down. To know your history, to know your past. Now you can know your future. So when it said we shouldn't have to or we shouldn't want to learn, any other culture know their past and know their true path. They don't know the past that somebody else writ for them. So if I could write your path, if I could write your story, and my story when I write about you is the only thing people know about, how they gonna view you through my words. So
Absolutely.
if I don't understand, if I don't sit back and write my own or understand my own history and get it and know how to use it to advance myself, I'm dead in the water.
Absolutely. Mildred, do you think that I should know about Black history?
Yes.
Why?
I know about your history.
But okay, let me tell you why that's different, in my opinion. So there are a lot of white people who you continuously hear, or I hear, get over it. We talk about that all the time. Why can't you make eye contact? Why don't you want to do this? Why do you feel a certain way towards the police department? So a lot of those questions can be answered with common sense and knowledge of one's history. We know that if you lived in that era, you could have been killed for making eye contact, for reading a book,
Correct.
for wanting to vote,
Correct.
for going to school.
Yes.
You have to know someone's history. If you want to speak on Black people and why you think they should get over it, you think they should do this, you have to know exactly what you're talking about. And if you did know, you wouldn't be speaking like that. That is why I think it is important for me to know your history, because before I walked in here years ago, I didn't.
Well, and I agree with you, and I do agree with Mildred. When we go to school, we got to learn everybody's history, Asian history. You know, we got to learn all the history.
Right.
Now they're trying to put, and we look at today the LBGT history. They're trying to put that into the. But Black History gets a month, and it gets this thing.
Yep.
But Jill, let me say this: a lot of people already know our history. The fact that they don't want to acknowledge it is the problem.
And there are
more people know. That's how they can battle it, because they know what happened. And that's
Yeah, absolutely. So we often look, when we talk about the media, we speak a lot on how the media represents, a certain racial biases and such. So a lot of that feels like it's just today or a little bit ago. Well, it was really no different in 1961. So in 1961, I came across a newspaper headline that read this: Negro shot by Mississippi state representative in self-defense as he was trying to attack Mr. Hearst. So let us tell the truth. Mr. Herbert Lee was a voting rights activist who was ambushed in broad daylight. Nothing about self-defense. He was actually attacked. The media represented him as a threat, a monster. There was no mention of him being a farmer almost his whole life, having a family, having 9 children. No mention of that. He was a very substantial citizen. So when we talk about the media, the same thing was happening then. So let's talk a little bit about Mr. Herbert Lee, and what happened. I mean, this was one of my most interesting parts of my research.
First of all, tell me what you learned.
So something that I thought was very interesting. Mr. Hearst was the white state representative that shot Mr. Lee.
Yeah.
They grew up basically adjacent from each other as children across, from farms. So as a white child and a Black child, they played together. They were friends. In fact, when, Herbert Lee got older, Mr. Hearst actually helped him with a loan. They were pretty close until Mr. Hearst found out that Mr. Lee was going to voter registration classes. That is when his whole opinion changed. So you go from playing as children to shooting someone that you grew up with simply because he wanted to vote.
And I wanted you to give me that experience so I can give you the answer. That was a time where they were very familiar with each other. They knew, but Herbert Lee got out of place. That's what happened. He got out of place, and that happens in our history a lot. And I know you're wondering what got out of place means, because you shook your head. You want to know, at this time, everything was separate. Everything was not equal. Now, Mr. Lee, he not only he was getting a group of people. He was just the first one to step up. There was actually a group. There was actually a line to come before him. They were actually to come, I think, the next day or 2 days later. He just had to go see what would happen when he went. He didn't expect to die. So, Mr. Hurst, and you can if you and I. Here's what I encourage everybody. They're only going to give you certain stories and books and papers and everything. You have to go back and you got to follow things. Mr. Hurst was upset because he tried to talk to Mr. Lee at first to tell him, you're out of place. You know your place. And he was like, no, time and day. And it escalated and they shot this man. And what was the other interesting fact that you found out about his death? They left him in the courtyard
For 2 days.
For 2
Uncovered.
days. Uncovered. Why?
Make a point.
To prove a
You come and vote, we shoot.
right,
That's why it didn't happen after that.
right.
That's why they left his body there. Remember, I just said it was either the day or the next day or 2 days later they were coming.
Yeah.
Why do you think that? That's why they
Because
left
they
that body?
wanted they wanted to be a display.
Yes.
They wanted to that was how they spoke.
Yes. So it's crazy.
Yeah, and something else. Are you familiar with what happened? Was Mr. Hurst ever charged?
Never.
Yeah. In fact, I ran across something where it actually said, I forget what it was. They tried to take it to, was it the FBI? They wanted the FBI to investigate, and they
Right.
didn't present it once. They didn't present it twice. 3 times the FBI refused to do any type of investigation. And go ahead.
Who was over the FBI at the time?
J. Edgar. J.
That
Edgar.
makes sense.
So one other thing that I thought was very interesting is the fact that when they talked about Mr. Hurst, when they talked, was it E.H.?
Yes.
E.H. Hurst, because he was actually a state representative
Right.
at that time. So when they talked about him and a little bit about his history,
Glorified him.
well, yeah, absolutely. And they had the whole department, the whole city. So they were looking for witnesses. There was one gentleman who came forward, Louis Allen.
Only one.
He was the only one, and he had agreed to testify. And back then, if you think about what a big deal that was,
Right.
he saw this man, he saw this happen. He saw this man sit out there for 2 days uncovered, but he still stood up and said, I saw this happen, I will testify. Well, I think he's a hero because guess what? He ended up dead. He ended up shot.
Right.
And we were talking about that a
Yes.
little bit before the show.
Yes.
He ended up shot when like a couple days before the court date.
The night before he was supposed to leave.
yeah.
But nobody knows.
Nobody
what
knows what
happened.
happened.
To the
Nobody
man.
knows what happened. Nobody knows. That's
got
the story.
shot.
That's the story. Nobody knows what happened.
The bullet just appeared like Lucky Charms.
There was no, as where he was the witness to another murder. There was no witness to his. But there's a caveat to his story, and nobody talks about this. He was actually the driver that drove to he drove Mr. Lee to the courthouse to vote, to register to vote. There's a caveat that he was not just an ordinary person.
Right.
So, would you say that it is fair for me to say that murder and other forms of terrorism were used in an attempt to intimidate and prevent African Americans from voting or exercising their right to do anything? I mean, threatening terrorism, if that wasn't an act of terrorism, I don't know what it was.
It was an act of terrorism and it was an act of hatred. Forget terrorism, hatred. Because at the end of the day, J. Edgar Hoover, once again, said most terrorist threat to America is the uniting of the Negro. And to this day, if you look at what's going on today, it's the same thing that happened back then. So basically, history is actually repeating itself multiple times in our face, and then on top of that, everybody getting off. So it's almost like, let me go get a shield and a gun and say, okay, time to reload it. I'm just gonna start shooting. Hey, guess what they was doing? They was fighting me. You get what I'm saying?
Right.
So at the end of the day, it's just what happened back then is happening now, and we're doing the same thing that we did back then. We're standing up. We're going to march. We want to protest. If it didn't work then,
Preach.
Right. What's it gonna do now?
why you think it's gonna work now? Is that to the point where we have to stand up and say, forget marching and asking and begging? I'm just gonna stop right there.
For forgiveness later. But I had a quick thing. So we've been talking about activists, right? And you posed a question about the why. We're talking about activists. It so happens that there have been activists. What happens when we get together and speak out, right? So these are people that have been martyred for the cause, right?
Right.
He snitched, he died. We're talking about the witness, right? And then you talk about hate crime. There are so many other cultures that have hate crime on the books,
Right.
except for the Black people.
Right.
We do have a hate crime on the books. We do. It's just sitting on the desk.
Oh, you know
Right.
what?
No. Yeah. Right.
You know
That was-
what?
It's just sitting there.
I'm just saying.
Actually,
there's
didn't he
things.
sign the hate? No, that's
No.
the anti-lynching bill.
The anti-lynching
Right.
bill.
But we do have a hate crime,
It's,
and it's sitting on the.
it's on top. It got to get dusted.
It got to get dusted, and there's other bills on top of it. About 150,000 bills on top of it.
Yeah, it's a big pile.
And the only thing that is different from back then that they gave us now is that we can carry guns without a permit in the state of Indiana. What happens when you carry guns, right? What's going to happen?
Well,
what
my
do you think is
question-
going to happen to
what-
our Black men?
What sense does that make? I mean, let's look at it from a reality situation. Regardless if I do have a permit, regardless if I do have an education, regardless if I don't have an education, regardless if I'm a multi-billionaire, guess what? Me being Black,
You going to carry.
Right.
I'm a threat.
We could talk for a long time about historical figures and icons, but this last icon is actually a trio. On June 21st, 1964, 3 men were killed defending their right to learn and human rights for all people. James Chaney, Michael Schwerner, and Andrew Goodman were tortured and murdered with the help of the sheriff in Neshoba County, Mississippi. The KKK was involved. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
And I know you were excited to speak on this, Clarence, as we discussed last night. So what do you know? I mean, what sticks out as these three gentlemen being icons in history?
Well, the first thing is the sacrificial life for Mr. Sherman and Mr. Goodman. You know, first of all, they were white individuals, but the South didn't like Jews as much as they didn't like Black people.
Right.
So these two Jewish men, they were actually from New York, and they came down and they were trying to help the Freedom Riders. They were trying to help the marchers. They were trying to help everything. And they ended up in Philadelphia, Mississippi. That's where this happened. If you ever want to see the whole story or a loosely based thing on the story, watch Mississippi Burning. Mississippi Burning. You'll get it. But these 3 young men, and once again, when they disappeared and they were found 3 days later. They were found in a burnt out car and nobody knew what happened. There was no witnesses, anything. The sheriff investigated the whole 9. The actual FBI did come in on this because they were forcing their actual president sent them in at the time.
It was white.
Yeah. But they actually got the job done. And what happened was, it was just not the sheriff. It was the sheriff, it was the mayor. It was the top businessman in that county. It was several other major figures in its city and town, in its county. They really got rid of the bodies because they were white people. That's the only reason the FBI came in, because these 2 white kids had died. Now, if it had just been a Black man there,
Which
where was the
happened
story?
because two bodies were found.
Yeah.
Before looking for these
Yes,
3,
they were found in a field.
and nobody talks about
Yeah,
that.
yes.
Right.
So the FBI only came in because there were these 2 white guys that ended up there. And that showed you that even if it's a cause for Black people, they don't care who they eliminate. You know, I think about it. And even in the whole civil rights movement, there were more white people that stood up. There were more white people that were martyred as well. But why did it take them for the FBI to say, okay, we can go in? So it's amazing that a whole town, and this was not the first, it was not the last.
Right.
It's not even today. It's not even the last that the whole town can get together, and that things don't. Funny thing is, we were talking. Eric and I were talking, and he was talking about police brutality, and we were talking about the George Floyd. Many of us watched on live, Facebook Live. We watched the demise of George Floyd.
Yeah.
We watched it. We saw who killed him. We saw what happened. But they had to go through the procedure, due process.
They had to go through the process.
Right.
You have to trust. When in that situation, you have to trust the process.
Right. But what more do we need? It wasn't any back alley. It wasn't any backfield. What more did we need to see that this black man had lost his life at the hands of the police of a government agency? So,
And we can agree to say that these men were fighters.
Yes.
They fought for rights that all of us take for granted today. Like I
Right.
said, the voting, the reading, the school, we can go on and on. They had to have some kind of drive, some kind of fight inside of them. Especially going back to the witness. What drove him? He knew he was going to die.
Yes.
He knew when he came forward as a witness that he was going to die for this man to get justice.
yeah.
So my last question is, what is that fight and that drive still present in people today?
I'm glad you asked that, and we're gonna get more in depth in that tomorrow. But here's the thing: that's a good question. That is a great question, and we have to ask ourselves, because I think we became lovers of our lives more than we have become lovers of the cause. These people gave their everything, their blood, their sweat,
Yes.
their tears. They gave everything to fight. But- literally. But I don't think any of us today have that in us. We love our lives more than we love the
Would
cause.
you go lay down your life for E?
Depends on the situation.
And
Straight up and down.
And see, so I mean, we're going to get into it more tomorrow, but you have to, when we go into talking about the leaders and the things like that, we have to look at the drive then and the drive now.
Yes.
Is it the same?
No, it's not. It's not. The
It's
same.
really not the same.
And why?
It's far from it.
E, why do you think, just briefly, why do you think that is?
Because the baton wasn't passed. Hands down, period. The baton was dropped and nobody picked it up. Everybody tried to say, oh, well, we got this person in office, this person here, this person there. The baton of the truths is dropped, and we need to go back and find it.
Go
and
back
pick
and get
it
it.
up.
Yeah, it's
Go
been
back and
kicked
get it.
around a little bit. We got to go find it.
Mildred,
Seriously.
what do you think the fight is still present? The drive is still present?
I don't know. For some, maybe. But you're saying that it's a different fight, but yet we're doing the same thing.
No,
that we
it's
did.
not a different fight. What I'm saying is the baton has been dropped. So when I say the baton has been dropped, the people that actually was down and was balls to the walls to this, they hand the baton off to people that say, I'm going to work in the office. Or if we work from within, we could change. You can't work from within and change, being that the fact once you get in, you got to conform to what they got going
Right.
on.
And that's, I'm glad that leads us out almost perfectly into tomorrow. So yes, I think we could all agree there were more than just Malcolm and Martin. So many more. Join us tomorrow at 8:30 as we continue to talk about the fight, those who fought then, those who fought today. Medgar Evers said, "You can kill a man, but you can never kill an idea." Thank you for joining us. And E,
Hey, always protect your mind.